James Whittaker wasn't your typical billionaire CEO. Sure, he owned one of the largest luxury car dealership chains in the world, Auto Luxury Group, but he didn't let success go to his head. He was the kind of guy who believed in staying connected to the heart of his business. That meant getting his hands dirty sometimes, even if it meant stepping out of his corner office. Lately, though, James had been hearing things that troubled him. Whispers from customers and employees alike suggested that some of his showrooms weren't living up to the high standards he'd set. Complaints about rude staff, lack of attention, and even outright disrespect were starting to pile up. Instead of just sending out memos or hiring consultants, James decided to take matters into his own hands. He wanted to see what was really going on for himself. So, one Saturday morning, James put together a disguise. He swapped his usual tailored suit for a pair of worn-out jeans and a hoodie that looked like it had seen better days. He added a pair of glasses that made him look more like a college professor than a corporate titan. To complete the transformation, he left his fancy watch and wallet at home, carrying only a small backpack with a water bottle and a notebook inside. With his new look ready, James headed to one of his busiest showrooms, a shiny glass building filled with rows of gleaming luxury cars. As he walked through the automatic doors, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Would anyone recognize him? Probably not, he thought. After all, who would expect the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company to walk in dressed like, well, an average Joe? The showroom buzzed with activity. Families strolled past sparkling sedans, couples admired sleek sports cars, and salespeople moved around like bees in a hive, trying to close deals. James wandered over to a bright red convertible parked near the entrance. It was one of their newest models, and he couldn't help but admire the craftsmanship, even if he already knew every detail about it. As he stood there, pretending to study the car's features, a young salesperson approached him. "Hey there, can I help you with anything?" the guide asked with a confident smile. James nodded and struck up a conversation, asking questions about the car's engine, mileage, and price tag. At first, the interaction seemed normal enough, but as James played the role of a curious shopper without giving away too much information, he started noticing subtle changes in the salesperson's tone. James kept his cool, nodding along and jotting down notes in his notebook. Little did the salesperson know, this wasn't just another random customer browsing cars, it was the man who signed their paychecks. And James was about to learn something shocking that would change everything. But that's a story for later. For now, James was focused on blending in, observing, and gathering intel. He had no idea how much this little experiment would reveal, not just about his employees, but about himself too. The salesperson chatting with James seemed friendly at first, but it didn't take long for things to take a sour turn. James kept his act going, asking questions about the car's features and casually mentioning that he was just looking. He wanted to see how the staff treated someone who wasn't showing obvious signs of being ready to buy. This was the kind of customer test that could reveal a lot about the showroom's culture. At first, the young man, who introduced himself as one of the top sellers on the team, was polite enough. He answered James's questions with enthusiasm, pointing out the car's advanced tech, luxurious interior, and impressive horsepower. But when James said he wasn't sure about making a decision anytime soon, the tone shifted. The salesperson's smile faded slightly, replaced by an impatient look. "Well," the guy said, crossing his arms, "if you're not serious about buying, maybe we should focus on customers who actually want to make a move today." His voice carried a hint of irritation, like James was wasting his time. For a moment, James felt a pang of anger rising inside him. Was this really how they treated people in his own company? But James stayed calm. He nodded and apologized, saying he just wanted to learn more before making such a big decision. Instead of softening, though, the salesperson doubled down. "Look," he said, his voice louder now, almost dismissive, "these cars aren't for everyone. If you're just here to look around because it's shiny and expensive, there are other places where you can do that without bothering us." James froze. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Not only had this person insulted him, but he'd done it loudly enough for nearby customers and co-workers to hear. A few heads turned, and James saw a mix of reactions. Some looked uncomfortable, while others smirked or whispered among themselves. It was clear this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. For a split second, James thought about pulling off his disguise right then and there. He imagined stepping forward, revealing his identity, and letting the entire showroom know exactly who they were dealing with. But he stopped himself. There was something deeper here he needed to understand. Why did this employee feel so entitled to treat customers this way? Was it just one bad apple, or was it a sign of a bigger problem? Instead of confronting him, James forced a tight smile. "Thanks for your help," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I'll think about it." Then he turned and walked away, heading toward the exit. As he left the showroom, he could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. That brief interaction had been humiliating, not because of the words themselves, but because they came from someone representing his brand. Once outside, James leaned against the wall of the building, taking a deep breath. He replayed the conversation in his mind, dissecting every word and gesture. What bothered him most wasn't just the insult, it was the lack of accountability. No one else in the showroom had stepped in to correct the behavior or apologize. The whole scene felt toxic, like the values James had worked so hard to build into his company were crumbling under the surface. As he stood there, James realized this wasn't just about one rude employee. It was about leadership. Somewhere along the line, the message of respect and professionalism had gotten lost. Maybe it was his fault for not staying close enough to the front lines. Or maybe it was a cultural issue that had grown unchecked over time. Either way, James knew he couldn't let it slide. He pulled out his phone and opened a note-taking app, jotting down ideas. First, he needed to gather evidence. Going undercover once wasn't enough. He had to dig deeper. Second, he needed a plan to address the problem publicly. If employees thought they could get away with treating customers poorly, they needed to see the consequences firsthand. By the time James got into his car, he'd made up his mind. He would return to the showroom, not as himself, but still undercover, and give the salesperson another chance. If the behavior repeated itself, James would step in and show everyone why respect mattered. More importantly, he would remind them who was ultimately responsible for setting the tone: him. Driving home, James couldn't shake the memory of those biting words. "These cars aren't for people like you." Those words weren't just aimed at him, they represented everything wrong with the attitude some employees had developed. Luxury wasn't just about cars, it was about how people felt when they walked into a showroom. And if James had anything to say about it, that feeling was going to change, for good. This wasn't just about revenge or teaching someone a lesson. It was about protecting the soul of his company. James Whittaker wasn't just a CEO, he was a builder of dreams. And no dream deserved to be tarnished by arrogance or disrespect. Back in his office, James sat alone with his thoughts, replaying the events of the day over and over again. The sting of that insult still lingered, but it wasn't just about how he felt. It was about what it represented, the possibility that this kind of behavior might be happening every single day to customers who didn't have the power to do anything about it. People came into his showrooms expecting respect, attention, and care. Instead, they were being judged based on appearances, dismissed before they even had a chance to speak. James leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He knew he couldn't let this slide, not as a CEO, not as someone who cared deeply about the reputation of his company. But simply firing one employee wouldn't fix the bigger problem. This wasn't just about one bad salesperson, it was about a culture that allowed such behavior to exist in the first place. If James wanted real change, he needed to send a message loud and clear: disrespect would not be tolerated under any circumstances. He decided to go back undercover, not once but twice. The first visit had been an eye-opener, but now he needed more evidence. He wanted to see if the same salesperson would treat him differently depending on how he presented himself. Would they act professionally when faced with someone who looked wealthy and important? Or would that arrogance shine through regardless? To make sure nothing slipped through the cracks, James called in his most trusted advisor, a seasoned manager who had been with the company almost as long as he had. "I need your help setting up cameras and microphones in the showroom," James explained, his voice firm but calm. "No one can know it's happening. I want to catch everything, every word, every look, every interaction." The advisor raised an eyebrow. "You're really going all in on this, aren't you?" "I have to," James replied. "If we don't address this now, it'll only get worse. And honestly, I owe it to our customers. They trust us with their hard-earned money. We can't betray that trust. Over the next few days, James worked behind the scenes to prepare for his second visit. He spent hours practicing his new persona, perfecting the role of a high-powered executive shopping for luxury vehicles. This time, he wouldn't walk in looking like an average guy. No, this time he'd come dressed to impress, in a tailored navy blue suit, polished leather shoes, and a gold watch that screamed success. He carried a sleek leather briefcase filled with fake documents labeled Corporate Fleet Purchase Proposal. The idea was simple: pose as a big spender interested in buying multiple cars for his fictional company. But James didn't stop there. He also made sure the showroom staff wouldn't recognize him from his previous visit. He styled his hair differently, swapped out his glasses for contact lenses, and even added a hint of cologne that smelled expensive but subtle. Every detail mattered. He wanted to test whether the same person who had insulted him earlier would treat him with respect, or if they'd revert to their old ways when no one was watching. As the plan came together, James couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was angry at the salesperson, at the system, and maybe even at himself for letting things get this far. On the other hand, he was excited to confront the issue head-on, to prove a point, and to remind everyone why customer service mattered so much. For James, this wasn't just about teaching someone a lesson. It was about restoring pride in the brand he'd built from scratch. Late at night, after finalizing the details, James sat in his study, staring at the stack of papers in front of him. He thought about the employees who worked tirelessly to keep the business running smoothly. Many of them were good people, hardworking, dedicated, and passionate about what they did. But somewhere along the line, some had lost sight of the values that made Auto Luxury Group special: respect, integrity, humility. These weren't just words printed on posters in the break room. They were principles meant to guide every action, every decision, every interaction. James clenched his fists tightly, then relaxed them. Tomorrow would be the day. He would step back into that showroom, face the same person who had insulted him, and give them a chance to redeem themselves. If they failed, if they showed even a shred of the same arrogance or disrespect, he wouldn't hesitate to act. Not just because it was his right as the CEO, but because it was his responsibility. For now, though, James closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Confrontation never was. But sometimes, the hardest decisions were the ones that mattered most. And James Whittaker wasn't afraid of doing what needed to be done. The next morning, James arrived at the showroom dressed to the nines. His navy blue suit fit in like a glove, his polished shoes gleamed under the bright showroom lights, and his gold watch caught glimmers of sunlight as he moved. This time, there was no mistaking his appearance. He looked every bit the part of a wealthy businessman ready to make a big purchase. He carried himself with confidence, his briefcase tucked neatly under one arm, exuding an air of importance that turned heads the moment he walked in. As soon as he stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. Employees who had barely glanced at him during his first visit were now scrambling to approach him. One of them, a young man wearing a crisp shirt and tie, rushed over with a wide smile. It didn't take long for James to realize it was the same salesperson from last week. The very person who had insulted him so casually just days earlier. "Good morning, sir," the salesperson said, his tone dripping with enthusiasm. "Welcome to Auto Luxury Group. How can I assist you today?" James fought back a smirk. He could see the difference immediately. Gone was the dismissive attitude. Instead, this guy was practically tripping over himself to be helpful. James nodded politely and opened his briefcase, pulling out the fake documents labeled Corporate Fleet Purchase Proposal. "I'm looking to buy several vehicles for my company," James said, keeping his voice calm but authoritative. "We're expanding our operations, and we need reliable, high-performance cars that reflect our brand image." The salesperson's eyes lit up like fireworks on the 4th of July. "Absolutely, sir. You've come to the right place. Let me show you some of our finest models." Without missing a beat, he gestured toward a row of luxury sedans and SUVs, launching into a detailed pitch about each car's features, performance stats, and customization options. James played along, asking thoughtful questions and pretending to weigh his options carefully. He made sure to throw in a few curveballs here and there, mentioning budget constraints or expressing uncertainty about certain models to see how the salesperson would react. To his credit, the guy stayed patient, nodding along and offering explanations without showing any signs of frustration, at least not outwardly. But James noticed subtle things: the occasional eye roll when he turned away, the muttered sighs when he asked for clarification on pricing details, the way the salesperson's smile faltered ever so slightly whenever James mentioned needing more time to decide. These tiny cracks in the facade told James everything he needed to know. Beneath the polished exterior, the same arrogance still lingered. It was just better hidden this time because James looked like someone worth impressing. After nearly 2 hours of discussion, James decided it was time to drop the bombshell. They were standing near a display model, surrounded by other customers and employees milling about. James took a deep breath, then removed his glasses and stared directly at the salesperson. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying enough weight to silence everyone within earshot. The salesperson blinked, confused. No, sir." James let the pause hang in the air for a moment, letting the tension build. Then he spoke again, his tone sharp but controlled. "I'm James Whittaker. I own this company." The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the room as people turned to look at him. Some dropped what they were doing. Others exchanged shocked glances. The salesperson froze, his face turning pale as the realization hit him like a freight train. For a second, no one said anything. The only sound was the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. "You may not remember me," James continued, his gaze piercing, "but I was here last week. Dressed differently, of course. And do you recall what you said to me then?" The salesperson stammered, clearly struggling to find words. "Sir, I don't. You told me these cars weren't for people like me." James interrupted, his voice cutting through the awkward silence like a knife. "You judged me based on how I looked, not on who I am. Do you think that kind of behavior reflects well on this company? On me?" The room was dead quiet now. Even the customers had stopped browsing, drawn into the drama unfolding before their eyes. The salesperson looked like he wanted to disappear, his hands trembling as he tried to apologize. "Sir, please, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, I wasn't thinking." James held up a hand to stop him. "You're right, you weren't thinking. But you got a second chance today. And while you tried harder this time, I saw glimpses of the same disrespect. That's unacceptable." He turned to address the rest of the staff, his voice firm but measured. "Let me be clear. Customer service is the backbone of this company. Every single person who walks through those doors deserves respect, regardless of how they look or what they drive. If you can't treat everyone with dignity and professionalism, you don't belong here." With that, James turned on his heel and walked away, leaving the entire showroom stunned into silence. As he exited, he felt a mix of emotions: anger, satisfaction, and even a little sadness. This wasn't the kind of leadership moment he hoped for, but it was necessary. Sometimes tough lessons were the only way to drive real change, and James Whittaker wasn't afraid to deliver them. The fallout from James's dramatic reveal spread like wildfire. Within hours, the story had traveled across the showroom floor and reached every corner of the company. Employees whispered about it in break rooms, managers huddled in meetings to discuss what had happened, and even customers started sharing their own experiences, both good and bad, on social media. The buzz was impossible to ignore. For the salesperson who had insulted James, the consequences were immediate. Still pale and shaken, he was called into a private meeting with senior management later that day. James didn't attend. He trusted his team to handle the disciplinary action, but he made sure the message was crystal clear: disrespect would not be tolerated. By the end of the week, the young man was gone, along with several other underperforming employees whose behavior during internal reviews revealed similar patterns of misconduct. But firing people wasn't enough for James. He knew punishment alone wouldn't fix the deeper issues at play. What the company needed was a cultural reset, a way to remind everyone why they were there in the first place. It wasn't just about selling cars, it was about creating experiences that left people feeling valued. That meant training, accountability, and leadership, all starting from the top. James wasted no time rolling out changes. First, he introduced mandatory workshops focused on customer service, empathy, and communication skills. These weren't your typical boring seminars where employees sat through PowerPoint presentations and nodded off halfway through. Instead, James brought in experts who used real-life scenarios and interactive exercises to drive home the importance of treating every customer with respect. Role-playing sessions allowed staff members to practice handling difficult situations, like dealing with indecisive buyers or addressing complaints without getting defensive. To keep everyone on their toes, James also implemented a secret shopper program. Trained evaluators posing as regular customers would visit showrooms unannounced, assessing how well employees followed the new standards. Those who excelled received bonuses, recognition, and opportunities for advancement. Those who fell short faced consequences, ranging from additional training to potential termination if the behavior persisted. Word of these initiatives quickly spread throughout the Auto Luxury Group network. Employees at other locations began scrutinizing their own actions more closely, knowing full well that James might show up unannounced, or send another undercover evaluator to test them. The fear of being caught behaving poorly motivated many to step up their game. But beyond fear, something else started to emerge: pride. Pride in representing a brand that stood for excellence, integrity, and genuine care for its customers. Despite the initial shockwaves, morale among the staff slowly improved. Many employees appreciated the renewed focus on values they believed in but felt had been slipping away over time. Some admitted they'd grown complacent, assuming their jobs were secure because the company was successful. Now, they realized success wasn't guaranteed. It had to be earned every single day, one satisfied customer at a time. James made a point of visiting different showrooms personally, often still undercover but sometimes as himself. When he did appear openly, he took the time to talk to employees, asking for their feedback and listening to their concerns. He wanted them to see him not just as the CEO, but as someone who understood the challenges they faced on the front lines. His approachable demeanor helped bridge the gap between leadership and staff, fostering a sense of unity and shared purpose. One evening, after wrapping up a long day of meetings, James found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. Sitting in his office with a cup of coffee, he scrolled through emails from employees thanking him for the changes. One message stood out in particular. "Sir," it read, "I've worked here for 5 years, and I've never felt prouder to be part of this team. Your actions reminded me why I joined this company in the first place. Thank you." That email hit James hard. It wasn't the praise that moved him. It was the reminder that leadership wasn't just about making tough decisions or holding people accountable. It was about inspiring others to be their best selves. About creating an environment where everyone could thrive, not just the business, but the people behind it. As he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, James thought about the road ahead. There would always be challenges, moments when things didn't go as planned. But this experience had taught him something valuable. Change was possible when you led by example. And while it hadn't been easy confronting the problem head-on, he knew it was worth it. Auto Luxury Group wasn't just a company, it was a community. A community built on trust, respect, and a commitment to excellence. And James Whittaker was determined to make sure it stayed that way. Months passed, and the changes James had put into motion began to take root. The company's showrooms transformed, not just in appearance but in atmosphere. Where once there had been a sense of complacency or even arrogance, now there was energy. Employees greeted customers with genuine smiles, listened attentively to their needs, and went out of their way to make every visit memorable. It wasn't just about selling cars anymore. It was about building relationships. The impact was undeniable. Customer satisfaction ratings soared to record highs, and online reviews painted a picture of a brand that truly cared. People weren't just praising the vehicles, they were raving about the service. Comments like, "I've never felt so valued at a dealership," or "These folks treated me like family," became common. For James, this was more rewarding than any profit margin or sales report. He had always believed that happy customers were the foundation of a successful business, and now he was seeing proof of that belief play out in real time. But the transformation didn't stop with customer feedback. Internally, the shift was just as profound. Employees who had once felt disconnected from the company's mission found themselves reinvigorated. They started taking ownership of their roles, understanding that they weren't just selling products, they were creating experiences. Some even came forward with ideas for improving processes or enhancing the customer journey, proving that when people feel respected, they're more likely to contribute meaningfully. James made sure to celebrate these wins publicly. During quarterly town hall meetings, he highlighted standout employees, sharing stories of how their efforts had made a difference. Whether it was a veteran salesperson going above and beyond to help a nervous first-time buyer or a new hire stepping in to resolve a tricky situation, James made it clear that every contribution mattered. These moments weren't just morale boosters, they reinforced the culture he was trying to build. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. There were still bumps along the way. Some employees struggled to adapt to the higher standards, while others resented the increased scrutiny. A few even left, claiming the pressure was too much. But James saw these challenges as part of the process. Change was rarely easy, and losing people who couldn't align with the company's values wasn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it often paved the way for better fits, people who shared the same passion for excellence. One day, while reviewing feedback reports, James stumbled upon a letter from an elderly customer. She wrote about her experience visiting one of the showrooms after months of hesitation. She'd been nervous about buying a car on her own, worried she'd be dismissed or talked down to. Instead, she was met with patience and kindness. The staff took the time to explain everything clearly, helping her choose a vehicle that suited her needs perfectly. For the first time in years, she wrote, "I felt confident behind the wheel again. Thank you for reminding me that I matter." That letter stuck with James long after he finished reading it. It reminded him why he'd started this journey in the first place, to ensure no one ever walked away feeling small or unimportant because of how they were treated. Success wasn't measured by numbers alone, it was measured by the lives touched along the way. As the months turned into a year, James began noticing something else. His own perspective had shifted. Going undercover and confronting those uncomfortable truths had forced him to reconnect with the heart of his business. He realized that leadership wasn't just about making decisions from a distance, it was about staying grounded, listening, and leading by example. By rolling up his sleeves and diving back into the trenches, he'd rediscovered what it meant to serve, not just as a CEO, but as a human being. In interviews, James often reflected on the lessons he'd learned. "Sometimes you have to remind yourself why you started in the first place," he said during one sit-down with a journalist. "For me, it's always been about creating moments that leave people feeling valued. That day in the showroom taught me how far we still had to go, but also how much we're capable of achieving when we hold ourselves accountable." He'd admitted that the experience had humbled him. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, the profits, the growth, the accolades. But none of that matters if you lose sight of the people who make it all possible, your customers and your team. At the end of the day, we're here to serve them. Everything else flows from that. Looking ahead, James knew there would always be room for improvement. No company was perfect, and no leader could afford to rest on their laurels. But he also knew they were on the right path. Auto Luxury Group wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And it wasn't because of flashy marketing campaigns or aggressive sales tactics. It was because of the people. The ones who showed up every day ready to give their best, knowing they were part of something bigger than themselves. For James, that was the greatest reward of all. The ripple effects of James's bold actions reached far beyond the walls of Auto Luxury Group. News of the Undercover CEO incident spread like wildfire, not just within the company, but across the industry. It became a story that everyone was talking about, how one man had gone to such lengths to expose flaws in his own business and then worked tirelessly to fix them. Journalists wrote articles praising James's hands-on approach, calling him a leader who walks the talk. Business analysts debated whether more CEOs should follow his example, stepping out of their ivory towers to see what life was really like on the front lines. But for James, the real victory wasn't the headlines or the praise, it was the lasting change he saw in his people. The culture at Auto Luxury Group had shifted in ways that couldn't be measured by charts or graphs. Employees were no longer just clocking in and out, they were invested. They took pride in knowing they were part of a company that stood for something meaningful. Customers noticed the shift too. Walk into any showroom and you feel it immediately. An atmosphere of warmth, professionalism, and genuine care. One afternoon, months after the initial undercover visit, James decided to pay another surprise trip to one of his busiest locations. This time, there was no disguise. He walked in wearing his usual suit, confident and approachable. As soon as he entered, heads turned. A young woman behind the counter recognized him instantly and rushed over with a bright smile. "Mr. Whittaker," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "It's an honor to meet you. We've all heard so much about what you did. Honestly, it inspired us to do better every day." James chuckled softly, shaking her hand. "Well, I'm glad to hear that. But remember, it's not about me, it's about all of you. You're the ones making the magic happen here." As he strolled through the showroom, he noticed something remarkable. Every interaction between staff and customers felt authentic. Salespeople weren't just pushing products, they were listening, asking thoughtful questions, and offering tailored solutions. Even the way employees spoke to each other had changed. There was a sense of camaraderie, mutual respect, and shared purpose that hadn't been as visible before. At one point, James stopped to observe a young sales associate helping a middle-aged couple browse SUVs. The couple seemed unsure, peppering the associate with questions about safety features, fuel efficiency, and maintenance costs. Instead of rushing them, the associate patiently explained each detail, even pulling up videos on a tablet to demonstrate certain functions. When the couple hesitated, saying they needed more time to think, the associate smiled warmly. "No problem at all," he said. "Take your time. My job is to make sure you leave here feeling confident, whether that's today or next week." James felt a swell of pride watching this unfold. This was exactly what he hoped for. A team that understood the value of patience, empathy, and putting people first. It wasn't about closing deals quickly anymore. It was about building trust and ensuring every customer left happy, regardless of whether they bought anything. Later that evening, back in his office, James sat reflecting on everything that had transpired. He pulled out a small notebook where he jotted down thoughts and ideas whenever inspiration struck. Flipping through its pages, he came across an entry from the night after his confrontation in the showroom. In bold letters, he'd written, "Leadership isn't about titles, it's about action. Show them who you are, and they'll show you who they can become." Reading those words now, James realized how true they were. By taking a stand and leading by example, he'd inspired others to rise to the occasion. He hadn't done it alone. The employees, the advisors, and even the customers played vital roles in shaping the company's new identity. Together, they had created something special. Still, James knew the work was never truly finished. Success wasn't a destination, it was a journey. There would always be challenges ahead, new competitors entering the market, shifting consumer preferences, economic uncertainties, but he felt prepared. More importantly, he felt confident in the team around him. They were resilient, adaptable, and united by a common goal: to deliver excellence in everything they did. As he closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair, James thought about the future. He envisioned a world where every car dealership operated with the same level of integrity and compassion, where customers weren't seen as transactions, but as individuals deserving of respect and care. It was a lofty dream, perhaps, but one worth striving for. For now, though, James allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The road had been tough, filled with hard choices and uncomfortable truths, but it had led him and his company to a better place. And as long as he stayed true to the values that mattered most, he knew they could handle whatever came next. Auto Luxury Group wasn't perfect. No company ever was. But under James's leadership, it had become something rare and beautiful. A brand that didn't just sell cars, it built connections, fostered trust, and made people feel valued. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy any leader could hope to leave behind.